computer. Okay, we're recording, folks.
I'm going to go out since I'm going to be eating.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm eating too.
I'm sure glad I'm recording this. Thanks for alerting me to record.
Oops.
So we can all go through what we're eating. So for the 2-week holiday break, I'm thinking, and it's not homework, it's not an assignment, but aren't we all kind of searching spiritually a little bit during the holidays? Even us atheists at an off moment, we get that same feeling maybe we get when we walk into a huge Gothic church, which we'll visit during this lecture. So I want you all to be thinking about maybe searching a little bit over the 2 weeks, and I'm going to demonstrate what I have in mind at the very end, okay? So that gives us kind of an introduction to what I have in mind today.
I don't know if I can wait the whole time to know what it is.
Well,
practice patience.
Yeah, so you've got to build suspense whenever you can, to keep everybody awake. So off we go here, and we have been dancing around in the high Middle Ages, and I've told you we got dark times ahead, but we're going to celebrate this 300-year interval a little bit more today. By the way, the thing that I'm going to present at the end previews what comes after the dark period of the later Middle Ages. It previews a little bit the Renaissance. So don't despair. The Renaissance is just over the horizon as we wind down here. So I want to just briefly review the traditional model of civilizations, Juan Jose, that kind of bind together the secular power with the religious justifications, right? And so Byzantium does that. They just have a temporal ruler who's also the head of the church. And we certainly see that in our history. And when I say our history, one of the main influences on this country is Anglo-Saxon history. And Henry VIII recreated the unitary secular leader with the leader of the church. But what we're seeing now at the peak of Christianity's power in Western Europe is a separation of church and state, which America adopted. That's a complex story, but an interesting one. But what was the source of the papal power? How could the papal power at the height of the high Middle Ages, how could they assert their authority over the state, over the warlords who took over after Rome fell, the Germanic warlords at first, but they became put on their fine clothes and became nobles, but their power rested on violence. And how could a spiritual power like the Christian church get control from them? And it all started with the Cluny reforms in 910. We don't have to go into detail, but just know in 910, that's when the church started to assert itself. The Vikings had come and been absorbed and maybe been civilized. So you didn't have that. You had a little bit more peace, which allowed us to enter the high Middle Ages. from the early period, which was pretty dark. But now we're and Dark Ages is kind of a misnomer, and historians don't use that much anymore. But certainly the early Middle Ages were culturally dark. And then you proceed to the Gregorian reform that starts around 1000. And it leads to a political reform where the church is superior to the state. And we've already told the story, right, of Henry IV, who had to walk to Canossa, that famous story. He's supposed to have walked barefoot in the snow to beg the Pope's forgiveness. And you remember the story, right? He defied the Pope. He said, I know that you want to appoint church leaders in my kingdom, but you can't. I've always appointed them, and I'm going to continue to appoint them. And the Pope said, okay, you are excommunicated. And by the way, so are all your subjects. Well, that's a power if you believe in hell. And his subjects believed in hell. And so you're going to see this in my presentation at the end, and you'll know where this comes from. This was from one of Ramsey's slides. And you'll have the whole story of where this comes from at the end, just to heighten the suspense in case any of you are getting sleepy. And it's also based on salvation. You know, the mystery religions, from the Middle East, we talked about that, how they, and Christianity being one of them, said, hey, we got salvation for you. Death won't be that bad. So the transfer of 3 Greek myths, I'm just reviewing. We talked about it last time. The cult of Artemis. Paul goes to Ephesus, where the Artemisium stands, and says, what's that doing here? Haven't you heard the good word, the Gospels, that we don't do paganism? Let's go in and seize all the books that have anything to do with paganism or Artemis, and they have a book burning. And then the myth is that Mary, mother of Jesus, comes to Ephesus. So the torch is passed, metaphorically at least, from Artemis to Mary. And of course, this is said to be Mary's house, which is highly unlikely. Transfer number 1. Transfer number 2. The Greek story of the renewal of the earth every springtime. The Greek story was Hades had kidnapped Persephone, and Zeus brokered a deal between Hades and Persephone's mother, Ceres, that look, Persephone spends the winter with Hades, but she can come out in springtime. And Ceres, where we get the word cereal, comes to collect Persephone in the springtime. And in the springtime, I don't think it's any coincidence that that's when we have our Easter and Jesus' resurrection. Since we're coming up on Christmas, I want to say a word about a third transfer, the Saturnalia. The Saturnalia was near the solstice, and I think if you go back in history, you'll see that there was always a holiday right after the solstice. But in around 340 or so, the Pope formalized and said, this is when Christmas is going to be. Nobody knows when Jesus was born, but the Pope said it's going to be right? It's going to replace the Saturnalia, basically. It was much more complicated than that, but I think the mood of the populace welcomed it. Now, when we did Egypt, I spent a lot of time on this basic schematic. If you know Curious George, this is in the style of Curious George. The author of Curious George is just wonderful, and he did a whole book on astronomy for kids. And I want to point out, we're approaching the winter solstice. And why do we have the winter solstice? We kind of know, but in this image really helped me solidify my understanding of the solstice. So the Earth is tilting at the equinox. It's not tilted either away from the sun or towards the sun like it is in summertime. It's tilted in the northern, I'm talking about northern hemisphere, is tilted towards the sun and the peak of summer. So summer solstice, June 21st. But you come to the winter solstice, and the days get shorter and shorter and shorter, and then they get longer and longer. So if you don't understand this model, and we didn't understand this model until Copernicus and Galileo, right? If you didn't understand this, what you saw was the sun dipping, getting lower in the sky, lower in the sky. And you can imagine our Neolithic ancestors saying to themselves, holy crap, the sun may be gone forever. It's not going to come back. And then you get over here around December 25th, and you say, wait a minute, it's not going down anymore. I think it might be coming up. Let's party. And that's the Saturnalia, and I'm sure the Saturnalia was preceded by human celebration all the way back. This was useful when we studied Egypt. I'll just give you all a quick review. Juan Jose and I thought this through. It turns out around this date here, predictably, the Nile flooded, right? After sometime in July, August. Predictably, the Nile would flood based on the rains in Africa months before. And during the summer solstice, the Earth had tilted so far away that the star Sirius would disappear at night because of the Earth's tilt. So Sirius would disappear in May sometime, but it would come back in July, just when the flood came. So the Egyptian priests figured that out. They watched the sky, they timed the flooding, and they said, you know, it's the reappearance of Syria as the Earth's tilt lessens, right? It lessens over here. And now you're not tilted so much away from Sirius, and you can see Sirius low in the night sky just before the flood. So when we were talking about civilization, here is an example of the religion incorporating scientific knowledge to dazzle the citizenry, if you will, and command legitimacy and respect. So something like this can tell us a little bit what civilization is. And so we, even today, we have great friends in New York City, and they invited us, you got to come and spend Christmas in New York. And it was a year we could do that. We came back for Christmas, but we were there for the winter solstice. And they took us to St. John the Divine for their solstice celebration. And it was really something. It was dazzling. and they recreated the days getting longer and the sun reappearing. So even in a house of worship today, we have echoes of the celebrating the return of the sun. So how did Rome regain the power from the warlords? Gregory VII. And what are his reforms? Well, priests can't marry. Now, that isn't very biological, and we've seen some of the sad side effects of that. People trying to repress their sexuality. It's a incomplete attempt at trying to do that at best, and scandalous at worst. The other thing that was getting a little bit out of hand was selling church offices. Later on, they'd start serving indulgences or selling indulgences, and that actually undid the Catholic Church with Martin Luther, and we'll get to that. So just remember at this point, it was just selling church offices, not forgiving of sins, selling that. And then there was this question of lay investiture, which is just a fancy way of saying the kings wanted to continue to appoint the head of the church. And we've talked a little bit about that with Thomas à Becket, in addition to Henry IV and his walk to Canossa in the snow. But what else is important with Gregory VII? Well, I think it's really important that what a step of reform where you discipline your own families. You took away wealth from the church. And that's a considerable achievement to reform that. I think the biggest thing, though, is the succession problem. And I talk in general about the succession problem from the very beginning. The succession problem in China is a huge one. And it looked like they had that solved, by the way. I'm time traveling now with Xi Jinping. Before Xi Jinping, they'd come up with every 10-year switch. That was always the Achilles heel in the Soviet Union, the succession problem. And the long knives came out after Stalin died, and they came out against Khrushchev. And then the old guys kept coming to power and dying. But the succession problem is huge. The other place where it was solved was right here in the good old USA, and we're going through the transfer of power, we think, now, and that's one of our great achievements. So I think the succession problem for civilizations is huge, and it doesn't look like China has solved it. It looks like they've gone backwards, and God knows, when somebody like Mao Zedong gets absolute power and you get the Cultural Revolution and close the universities, you got a problem. All right, other double-edged swords here. I've already talked about this, the celibacy. What did that entail? Well, there were double monasteries. And you can imagine there was a little bit of hanky-panking going on in double monasteries. So they broke those up. They cloistered the nuns. And unfortunately, we're back to the Garden of Eden view of femininity, the Eve, the impurity of Eve, the temptation of Eve, and we certainly see that lingering in the New Testament and among some of our evangelical friends. No divorce. The marriage was a sacrament. Well, that's a tough one. But Gregory somehow forced the King of France to take back his Danish wife. So this guy is really something, Gregory VII. There, as thorough as this reform was, there are always zealots that want you to go even further. We see that a little bit in Black Lives Matter. I don't want to get into that, but I think it's it's a human, very human tendency. You go down the road of reform, and a moderate amount of reform, when to put on the brakes, that's a tough one. There's no easy answers. And it went all the way to the Albigensians, who thought that the God of the Old Testament was actually evil, that he created this material world and people should give up all their possessions. I had problems with this as a kid. Going to church. I was raised in a church-going evangelical family, and this business of what is the wafer again? What's the grape juice? That's a stretch. And the other downside, I think, is that Jews and Muslims had to wear special clothing, and we saw where that led, the yellow six-pointed star. The other downside is the ecclesiastical courts. The church got their own court system. This is what Henry II resisted with Canterbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Becket. He resisted Becket because Becket was setting up these ecclesiastical courts. And we know that having ecclesiastical courts without checks and balances eventually led to the terrible Inquisition. And I showed this slide earlier. I just want this slide, we summarizes all the spiritual stuff that we're seeing at the peak of the high Middle Ages. This stuff is going to come later. I'm going to show the slide again, but this is just a quick summary. The church is where God dwells, a sanctuary, a place of respite from power struggles, the new Gothic cathedrals reaching towards heaven, all the church symbolism that we have seen since every time we walk into a church, every time we travel and go into a Gothic cathedral, we look at it, and it's overwhelming, the amount of it. But who among us hasn't had a moment in front of some work of art where you say, I kind of get it. And the important thing of educating the illiterate peasants, what a giant step forward that is to try to enlighten the grassroots workers. Not every society, not every civilization has that, but that's certainly an important aspect of civilization. And of course, all the stuff that guaranteed salvation, and all these things, these churches that we walk into, we don't know who built them. We don't know who did the stained glass. A lot of it was anonymous. We're learning a little bit more. And then there's the giant step of the urban monastic movement, and in particular, Francis. So I mean, we all live in near San Francisco. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this is his order of little brothers. They took the vow to poverty. And here's Francis himself. Now, this painting is by Giotto. And okay, spoiler alert, he's my guy. He is going to be the author of my grand finale today, Giotto. And Giotto is one, I'm going to say he's the pioneer. He brings to art perspective and detail and human emotion and features, pathos, storytelling that we haven't seen before. So here we are, Juan Jose, and we're in 1300 when Giotto hits his peak. And there were a few Roman paintings that I looked at and said, wow, that's pretty good. But here we are with Giotto really taking art to a new high level. And we're gonna, when we hit Renaissance, we're gonna be really into art. Now, art's not my specialty, but we do have two volunteers already. One for Frau and Frau Angelica, is it, Aiko? And one for Da Vinci. So when we hit the Renaissance, we're going to be doing a lot more art. But for the high Middle Ages, I think Giotto's our guy. And if we know Giotto, we understand art in the high Middle Ages. Back to St. Francis. So poverty, but joy. This guy said, let's not be dour about this. Let's enjoy what we're doing and give our thanks to Sister Mother Earth. Sister Mother Earth. And so now we go back to the very beginning where we were talking about Mother Earth in Asia Minor and in Sybil. In her fauna, the animals, the birds in particular. And if we're going to be joyful, let's have a little bit of music, and let's use our own language, vernacular, a complicated word for using the customary language of the common person. Where as long as we're educating them, let's use the language that they speak in. But as the church got power for courts and did the Inquisition, they said, well, who could lead the Inquisition? They turned to the Franciscans to lead the Inquisition. That's not good. But it turned out that it bit them in the end, and they were, after they were persecutors, they were the persecuted. So that there's an irony. Now, Giotto is said to have done a lot of the paintings in Assisi, but some of those are in dispute. But I'm going to be showing you ones that aren't in dispute at the very end. In addition to monks, we have nuns, and these new nunneries are set up separate, far away, isolated. But you get a series of very powerful abbesses. We didn't read about abbesses in our history books growing up, but the history books now show a number of abbesses who leverage their spiritual power into some sort of political action. And so Clare of Assisi, the poor Clares. By the way, this is interesting. In 1958, she was named the Saint of Television. Why? Because she had reportedly been able to see in her mind's eye a ceremony happening on the other side of town. Well, that's television. The vernacular. So now we get, using the language of the common people, some stories. And then we know how important stories are for civilization. So the people's stories, vernacular, Beowulf, early example. The Canterbury Tales in the vernacular, which we all learned in high school, Juan Jose. This, you have to learn Cervantes, and when we have to learn Chaucer. Did you learn Cervantes, Juan Jose?
I'm sorry, Mr. John?
When you study early Spanish literature, is that Cervantes, Don Quixote?
Oh yeah, that's a must. We'll start from there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So that Chaucer is our Cervantes.
Well, I never learned Chaucer. My education was derelict.
Oh no, that's sad.
Yeah.
Also in the vernacular music, the troubadours, and this a new way of thinking about love. I don't know. I'm sure some people have written books on love, and was the concept of love this new valuation of love that the textbooks assert? Is it really new, or had there been platonic, idealized love before? But it also ranged to the body and risque. Remember going on, we talked about the beginning of the Crusades, but there are a lot of Crusades in this very confusing map. You could do a whole lecture on this map of the Crusades. But it went first through fourth, and then individual members doing their own Crusades. And where all the major battle ones, you see there was a big battle in Constantinople. How could that be? That's not the Holy Land. We'll get to that. But I'm going back to an earlier slide because of the setup for the Crusades. I wanted to, because Iko had noticed that, wait a minute, there was a Norman kingdom in Syria, and yeah, they were the Normans from Normandy conquered England, and we're certainly going to get to that. And they conquered southern Italy. They took away Byzantium's control of the churches of southern Italy. Rome controlled the churches of northern Italy, but the Normans took care of that and unified all these churches under Rome. At the same time, they emasculated the power of the Pope that preceded Gregory, Leo. But they settled all along in the Mediterranean. So they were primed for the call to the Crusades. And it came, just to a way of review, when the Seljuk Turks came down and tossed the Arabs out of Jerusalem. The Arabs had been in Jerusalem ever since the 600s. But the Seljuk Turks said, no, we're in charge now. And we know the Turks eventually are going to take all of Byzantium and conquer Constantinople in 1453 and take over portions of Europe. And they were going to be knocking on Vienna's door. They took over Hungary, knocked on Vienna's door. But we're now in around the 1000s, and the big battle of Manzikert, and then they took over, and they said, okay, the Arabs and their Jewish assistants here in Jerusalem may have allowed you to come and visit Jerusalem on pilgrimages, but we're not going to allow that, or it's going to cost you. and so that was the motivation for the early Crusades. And we've talked about the myths of the Crusades, and it finally came down in the Third Crusade to the climax, the battles between Saladin's troops and Richard's troops. This one shows them actually in battle, which probably wasn't true. But then everything turned to farce. At some point, and it's probably the end of the Third Crusade, Richard coming home from the Third Crusade back to London, and we know in the story of Robin Hood. So one of our myths, Juan Jose, for our Anglo-Saxon childhood is the myth of Robin Hood, who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, in the spirit of St. Francis, I might add. And he has to battle against the bad King John. You'll hear about him later on. And he finally prevails with his daring do. He's a great archer. and finally, Richard II makes it back to England, and it has a surprise visit with Robin Hood in the myth, in the story. Part of our civilization, these stories that tie things together. But what had actually happened in history is the king of Austria had kidnapped Richard and held him for ransom in a castle in Austria. And who raised his ransom? The Jews of London raised the money for his ransom. And what did that cause? Was London grateful? No. They were jealous. They were envious that the Jews were getting credit, and Richard came home and praised them and thanked them. And that made them mad. And Simon Schama says that was the first Holocaust, the London protest against the Jews who had ransomed Richard on his way home. What the hell? What the hell? And the other farce was the Holy Roman Emperor. So we talked about Henry IV, the guy that had to walk to Canossa. Later on, there's a Henry VI, and he heads off on a crusade and dies before he gets there. And in the Fourth Crusade, farce really goes full scale when Venice, as part of its commercial rivalry with Byzantium, sacks Constantinople. What? You know, they gather troops. They say, "Hey, crusade, we're going to the Holy Land." Oh, there's Constantinople, and they sack Constantinople, weaken Constantinople for its remaining days. They held on, but the Turks came and went around Constantinople and conquered the Balkans and waited to totally surround Constantinople, and then came back and took Constantinople. It was in a weakened state thanks to Venice. So the consequences of the Crusades, the expanded bureaucracies, knights let off steam, the idle land passed from indebted nobles who had to raise money to finance their trips to the Holy Land. And Italian merchants, we talked about bankers, we've talked about the great trade that was going north to south now, and Italian merchants were raking it in. And now with these contacts to Asia and the Silk Road, there was a lot more profits for them to be made. In this north-south trade, the Jews who had settled along the Rhine, when the Romans went up the Rhine, the Romans took with them Jews to help with the finances. So some of these communities on the Rhine had Jews living in them since Roman times. And so they were in a very good position to lend money, which Christians technically weren't allowed to do. And I'll talk about that in a second. And they were attacked by the Crusaders. And finally, England and France just expelled the Jews around 1290. We were in York, and there is a famous tower, the founding tower of York, where this pogrom was being carried out in York, and all the Jews went to that tower just for protection. And they were given protection, but the mob persisted and burned down the tower with all the Jews in it. Come on. And this was in York in 1290s or something like that. And by the way, one of Columbus's goals of heading west was to be able to launch a crusade on the Holy Land from the west, surprise the Turks from the west. Now, we get to a breakthrough, and I see, in the interest of time, I am going to make a little detour here. I'm not going to have time to go through Peter Abelard and Eloise and the intellectual stuff. I'm going to put off, I might come back and do the churches and the cathedrals, but I want to do, my, I've got about 15 minutes. I want to do my little spiritual religious art thing. Now, I'm not sure that I am going to be successful in changing slides. Does that work? Do you see the big towns, or do I have to stop share?
No, we see it.
See them.
Okay, so you remember this slide from before, and I put this slide up just to say, hey, there was, we're dealing with human beings here. We're dealing with human nature. And envy, I think, is a real thing. We can't talk about politics today without talking about envy. It's basic, and we saw it in the election. The envy of the rural for the towns, and maybe some vice versa. I'm not loading all this on rural people. I don't mean to do that, but there's a lot of misunderstanding between the way life is lived in rural communities in the town. Now, this is my second Giotto painting, and this is envy. And this is the counterbalancing solution to envy. So Giotto, he showed that the eyes saw something across the way that they wanted. The neighbors got something and I don't have it. And it's like a snake that turns on itself, and you want to consume it. And you're holding your money bag. So I'm going to include, and for reasons that'll be clear, in envy, avarice, and selfishness. This was behind this painting of Giotto, to try to capture. And here it's standing in hell. This is going to take you to hell. Charity is the counterbalancing thing, sharing what she's got, and she's standing on money bags, showing her contempt for the material good. So Giotto, this was painted 200 years after Giotto. Giotto thrived around 1300, and I think this was painted around 1470. So this is probably not what Giotto looked like. Some people said he was 4 feet tall, possibly from a birth defect. All his kids were very misshapen and ugly. And somebody pointed that out, and he's, how can you do such beautiful paintings? And he says, well, I paint during the day and I make children at night. And so Juan Jose, now I am picking one place, one city, one building, and it's not a very big building, but if you want to experience the high Middle Ages, and we're not at the Renaissance yet, but this is where you can argue the Renaissance is born. You get on the train in Milano, you've got to transfer here. You go through Verona, which is, by the way, is very nice. So maybe if you take a week off, stop in Verona, and you get to Padua. Oh, Venice is just a little bit more. So maybe you take 2 weeks off, but you got to get off in Padua. And I have a video, maybe I'll show it at the very end. I've got a lot of videos, but here's the building. It's called the Scrovegni Chapel. And to go into this building now, the city has built a chamber where you have to sit for 15 minutes to dehumidify your body and to take and purify the smog that is in your clothes. This is how pure you have to be to get into this building. You have to have reservations way in advance, Juan Jose. You just can't show up. You got to make your reservations. And Ramsey made reservations for the four of us. So you can't see the chamber here now. That chamber's been built after the fact. And this, who was Scrovegni? Well, he said to Giotto, he said, do all this art in there in the name of our family, but listen, don't critique usury. Well, that's because the Scrovegnis were usurers. They made their money by manipulating money and charging interest. And Dante had put Scrovegni's father in the seventh level of hell in his Inferno. So this is Scrovegni, and maybe his motivation is to stay out of hell, to appease God and ask for forgiveness of his sin of usury. Now, Juan Jose, don't take that too literally. That's back in the Middle Ages. Usury's okay now. God, so you're going into business, and if you have to deal with interest, so all's forgiven. So you enter in, and this is it. This is the whole thing. It's not very big. There's 37 different paintings. You're looking, you just stepped in the entrance. This is the altar or the apse. That's where the Scrovegnis are buried. They converted, this was just their private chapel next to their castle. The castle's been torn down. The castle was built on an old Roman Colosseum. They're up there. I obviously can't do all 37 paintings. Now you go up to the front, and now you're looking back to the entrance. This is the entrance that you just came through. And right outside that door is the dehumidifier. And so look, the centerpiece are these wonderful paintings of Giotto in this new realistic, naturalistic style, where you can see perspective, you can see emotions. And right, of course, in the center is Jesus. This is Judgment Day. So this is where it's going to be decided whether you get salvation over here on Jesus's right, or you go to hell. And there's the picture that Ramsey has shown over and over again. This is the power of the church. The church had convinced people that they, if they followed the preachings of the church, could avoid this. And that's the power of persuasion, the power of an idea, the power of culture. That's very key to civilization. Not what's necessarily true, but what people believe to be true. The other thing that Giotto did is he bought in to this cult of Mary that I alluded to last time, that is particularly strong in Western Christianity. And how far did they take this? They went back to Jesus's grandma, Anne, not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. So this is a retrofit. And Mary was said also, in addition to Jesus, to have been the product of immaculate conception. That's not anywhere in the Bible, but it became quote unquote implicit around this time, and dogma as of 1854. And this is Anne giving birth to baby Mary. This isn't baby Jesus. This is baby Mary. And because she was conceived immaculately, she's already got her halo. So there you go. Look at the color. Fresco. So fresco refers to painting on a wet surface. Painting on a wet surface. That's all it means. And Giotto mastered this. We haven't seen anything like this before. The one exception to painting on a wet surface was the color blue. There was something that happened if you use this pigment on a wet surface. So they had to wait for it to dry, and then they added blue. And unfortunately, the blue color has not survived time the way that the paint that was applied to the wet surface and got baked in, as it were, has been able to survive. So here's Saint Anne with the Mary as a adolescent. Now you get to the life of Jesus, starting with his circumcision. Then he goes through Jesus's life with the and here's the battle, throwing the money changers out of the temple. The usury wasn't forbidden, but Jesus didn't think you should do business in the temple. And all the way through, I'm just showing a sampling of the 37 paintings. So here's Judas identifying Jesus for the Romans. And here's the lamentation and look at the vividness of the colors. Look at the expressions. Look at the perspective, the body movements, but all the while still with the spiritual. Now this is where I'm gonna end. Do you see anything familiar here? Here's envy.
Envy.
And here's charity. All right. So here's what you got to understand. These are paired, virtues and vices. And they're on different sides of the church. So as you're standing and looking towards the entrance at the front of the church, all the vices are on your right-hand side, and all the virtues are on your left-hand side. And you start here. You start here. This is prudence, and this is foolishness. This is believing in fake news. This is suffering from the lack of knowledge. And you go to the other side of the church, right opposite, and here this is prudence. This is knowledge. This is wisdom, and so on. We'll get close-ups here, but I just want to go through this. Prudence and foolishness, that's where we started. You'll see inconstancy and fortitude. So having a good set of values that you stick to. You see anger, and you see temperance. You see, and then all these are ethical dyads, if you will. And if you can master these ethical dyads, then you reach the point of where there'll be justice and there'll be love. If you don't reach that part, you're stuck at injustice or war. And at this point, if you've got justice, then you can graduate to these theological values: faith, hope, and charity. Only they have it in faith, charity, and hope in that order. And their counterpoints. And notice the counterpoint of charity. It's not just envy. He wasn't allowed, Giotto wasn't allowed to decry usury, but it's implied in envy that avarice, which is excessive interest rate, right, usury, and selfishness are a part of envy. So he expanded the concept of envy, which is just right in line with my earlier thinking. And then the very last thing, if you can't master the theological virtues and you're desperate of reaching heaven, these up here will make you a good citizen. These three down here will get you into heaven. But if you don't despair, if you don't think you're going to make it, because the last thing before you walk out the door is hope. This is the big one. This is the big one. And this is what we all have to have. And where do these paired virtues come from? They come from St. Augustine. We talked about St. Augustine. He was 1,000 years before Giotto, almost 1,000 years. And he was one of the first theologians in Christianity. And what were his influences? They were the Greeks. They were the Roman philosophers, the Stoics. And remember at the beginning of the Middle Ages, we said that Western Europe is going to be a product of three things. It's going to be a product of the Mediterranean civilizations, which we studied when we did the classical age, and hopefully we can go back and study that again for some of you. And they were the Germanic tribal influences in the rough justice of Das Volk. And who put those two desperate things together? Who put the wisdom of the Mediterranean with the Germanic warlords? It was the church. The church is the third thing. And it was the most important because it bound together these two things. And St. Augustine did the heavy lifting on that, and is expressed by Giotto. And Augustine's big message is, hey, humans, you're flawed. You've got original sin. You've got envy. You're restless, and you got envy. And so just in summary again, what Giotto was trying to say, the three ethical virtues, the mid-level, justice, injustice. If you achieve that, you get love and you graduate to try to find heaven, hope, faith, and charity. That's the way we say it, Juan Jose, but in Giotto would want us to say faith, charity, and finally hope, because she's the last thing you see before you walk out of the door. And so let's just go through these pairs. And this is my grand finale here. So here's foolishness corrected by prudence. Here's inconstancy. She's about ready to fall. She's sitting on a ball, that stupid thing. But here's fortitude. You're vigilant with your values. Here's anger, rending her garments. But here's temperance. Hold on, count to 10. And here's, if you pass these 3 tests of reason, you graduate to pursue heaven. And so if you reach justice and peace, then you go on to the theological values. You got to have faith. If you don't have faith, here are the fires of hell burning. You got to have that. We've already talked about envy and charity, big piece. But finally, you can't despair. This is pretty graphic way of presenting desperation. But here, before you go out the door, here is hope. What I would propose, this is my entry into a work of art that has turned my head. I am not a religious person, but this has turned my head. When I visited this, I did not know all this stuff. I've learned it so I could share my instincts with you. And in the process of studying what I experienced, I learned a lot, and the experience has become deeper as I try to explain it to you. And so I'm going to propose, if you want, over this 2-week period, to think back on some I'm going to say spiritual work of art. It doesn't have to be in a religious tradition necessarily, but we are studying Christianity, and this is the peak of Christianity and how it reached that peak. And if you want to share it with the group. So that said, I will stop the share and take any questions or objections.
Does you're talking about, does it have to be Christian? I mean, you're talking about spiritual, and we're studying Christianity. So, okay.
Yeah.
Anything spiritual.
Yeah. Anything spiritual. And it's optional, right? It's the holiday, so it's for extra credit. How about that?
So I'm reading about Da Vinci, and it's really interesting, but tied culturally to that period of time. But this is so exciting to look at it that way. So I will, you've set a very high bar, sadly, but we'll see what I come up with. I think this will be fun.
Okay, good. I like your enthusiasm. What do you think, Juan Jose? Doable? Your mother will help you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's willing to help me. So yeah, doable. Let's do it. Let's go for it.
And it looks like Irene already has hers. For the solstice, how can we be our better selves when the sun is rising? I like that, Irene.
Good.
Let's see. What am I missing? I don't. Let's see.
Look on chat.
Oh yeah. Okay. I put it up. For the solstice, how can we be our better selves when the sun is rising? All right. Nice. We don't. Yeah, we can start using chat more creatively now that I'm beginning to understand the technology here.
Yeah, I just had this evil thought because I am, part of cognitive dissonance. So I just had this evil thought that, here we are, our days are increasing, and in the Southern Hemisphere, they are at the exact same time decreasing. And so you could imagine hope rising in one part of the hemisphere and that, or one half of the world, and then the other half it's decreasing. And then, and so we always have those dichotomies, and it's true in Marxism, it's true in Thomas Piketty, it's true, we're human.
No,
Yeah.
Argentina instituted a wealth tax.
Who did?
Argentina.
When?
They just did it. They just passed it. It's really exciting.
No shit. Wow.
Argentina?
Aiko, I love the intonation. Are you sure you got that right? Argentina?
Not sure.
This is Peronismo, Juan Perón, the Evita.
Yeah.
This is
Right.
in their spirit, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I hope it's just the beginning. Every nation will follow.
Well,
in their
we're
footsteps.
way behind.
No shit.
Yeah.
Although Bezos's wife really donated a lot of money. She was amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. His ex-wife, she donated a lot of money. And to lots of charities. She wasn't picky.
I'm sorry, whose wife, Aiko?
Bezos's
Oh,
ex-wife.
right, I heard that. Yeah, yeah.
They need to do is
So I want to know, Aiko, what % of her wealth she donated?
Well, her percentage really went up. I mean, everybody that's wealthy with the stock market the way it is, her wealth went up tremendous.
Exactly. But I mean, is she doing the Warren
like
Buffett giveaway 50%, or is she somewhere down
Well,
in the
she
5%?
signed
and it's still
on.
more?
She
Yeah.
signed on for Bill Gates's, giving it all away, as much, quite a bit.
but she has to die. So does
She
that mean she has a food taster and she has like
Oh, yeah. No, that could be a problem.
They say people of color, percentage-wise, are so much more generous.
Absolutely.
Really?
yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
Well, that's nice.
Good for them, says Aiko. I'm one of them. Yay!
I wonder.
You're in the basement. You and me.
I wonder if poor people in general are more generous.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The higher you go up the scale, the more you feel justified. Otherwise, you would be running your different. I mean, that's how I think of it. What do I know? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that interesting study they did in Berkeley. It's kind of a surrogate for wealth and class attitudes, but it was a traffic study. So they set up at a crosswalk, and they deliberately put people to walk in the crosswalk at the last second before a car was coming. And they looked at the make of the car and measured the leeway that the driver would give across a pedestrian. And,
Oh my God.
and it turned out that Mercedes and BMW would almost run you down.
That's right.
Whereas a 20-year-old Plymouth would stop.
Because it was tired anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe their brakes weren't that good, and so they had to stop.
Yeah. Or they're really old and they don't trust themselves.
Really.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that study. That's an interesting one, John.
Yeah.
What are you willing? And that combined with that old Stanford prisoners and jailers study, just
Yeah,
like ay. Okay. Yeah.
really.
So
Well, thank you so much. This was
Okay,
really
class.
always fun.
I'll see you in not next week, not the week after. I'll see you in 3 weeks. What will that be? That'll be the first Thursday in January.
which I
Right.
think is the 7th of
Okay.
January.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Good
Yay.
holidays, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Happy holiday.
Really.
Holidays.
Bye.
Bye.
Holidays.
Take care.
Bye, Juan Jose.
Yeah, bye, Juan Jose. Happy Christmas to your
Fel-
family.
Feliz Navidad.
Muchas gracias.
De nada.
To you too. Stay healthy.
Thank you,
See
you
in 2
as
weeks.
well. Please, everybody. Bye.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.